Hello, Simone. I'm excited to be here with you today. Today, we are going to be talking about the infamous March to Gaza.
No.
That so many hilarious videos have come out on of like these woke people being whipped by like Egyptian children, not understanding, making these like impassioned pleas to like Egyptian like police. Like,
you have a choice. You're humans. We're here for humanity. You are part of humanity. You are my brother.
Help your Islamic brothers. Yeah.
Yes. And the narrative that has come out on the right is these people just don't understand the sentiment in Egypt. These people just don't understand, like they assume a sort of pan-Muslim,
Identity.
And because of this narrow progressive understanding, they did this incredibly foolish thing where they thought they were going to get all the way to Gaza. And obviously that was never a possibility.
Yeah, it seems like they did no coordination with the Egyptian government because most of the resistance seems to be indeed led by police and government officials.
So we're going to come at this with this is one of those instances where if you're in a right-wing media bubble, you are being misinformed about what actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say that it doesn't make them look stupid, but they did, for example, coordinate with the Egyptian government, or at least
did.
And the Egyptian government didn't get back to them. They didn't tell them all this was going to happen.
Okay. Then it doesn't count.
They basically laid an ambush for them. They should have known that this ambush would be laid, and we'll get to why they should have known this.
Okay.
Mostly it has to do with the number of governments that have been destabilized by allowing Gazans to come in. The time that Hamas blew up the wall between Egypt and Gaza, and like 500,000 to 1 million people flooded into Egypt and caused major disruptions and murder waves and stuff like this. The people of Gaza are very murdery. Whenever a country takes them in, it's usually a few years before mass deaths start. If you're wondering why they so persistently end up revolting against the countries that took them in and housed them and gave them aid and trying to kill their leadership or trying to kill other people within the country, a lot of this, and I want to point out, I say this without judgment, has to do with how they contextualize the concept of death. And I say this without judgment because within my own family and culture, we have a unique contextualization of death. We believe that you're not supposed to overly indulge in it. You're not supposed to let it emotionally affect you. And so, I've got to be accepting of how other people are deviant in how they contextualize something like death, while also accepting the practical implications of these differences. Specifically, the people of Gaza, as you'll see in this video here of this mother, two of her kids just died, and she is cheering and looks like it's the happiest she's been in her entire life. And she's got a bunch of other women, some of whom presumably had kids who died as well, who are also very excited. She's talking about how she's hoping that her grandkids also die soon. And the reason is because she believes that if in a war against, whether it's Jews or Muslims who believe something a little different from them, if they get killed in one of these wars, it's an auto pass to heaven. And because of that, it is the most desirable life path. So if they settle down in a country and find peace and stability, and yet this part of their culture isn't eradicated, they have a strong motivation to create revolutions just due to their culture. And you could say, well, then we should eradicate their culture. And it's like, well, then one, that's cultural genocide. And two, what does that even look like? Like, are you saying you want to separate the kids from the parents and then raise them in like separate boarding schools so they don't build this concept? Like, it's not like the concept is out of line with their religious beliefs. Well, many Muslims don't relate to death this way. This isn't the only region of the world where Muslims relate to death this way. They're just more extreme than any other Muslim group. And so I think to say that like we have the right to erase this is wrong, but I also think it's understandable why other countries do not want to take them in and why they keep revolting and refusing common sense peace deals when Israel offers it to them, because that's not what they want. What they want is war and the opportunity to die.
والحمد لله اللهم اجرنا بمصيبتنا واخلفنا خيرا منها ونتنياهو مستعدين نضحي كمان وكمان 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 اللهم خذ من دمائنا وارواحنا واولادنا وكمان عندي احفاد 2 مستعدين هدول لسبيل الله، كلها سبيل الله. الله اكبر ولله الحمد، الله اكبر ولله الحمد، الحمد لله. وهي شكرات لكل الشهداء. الحمد لله. الله اكبر ولله الحمد، الحمد لله ولله الحمد. الله اكبر ولله الحمد.
ليش فرحان ليش مزعج؟
ليش؟ انا زغزغت لان اولادي في الجنه وانا لحقاهم ان شاء الله رب العالمين، شرف لإلي.
It also helps explain when people are like, how is Hamas, getting people to give them their babies to like put at potential sites where they're going to be missiled. And if you see this woman and how she's like, oh, I can't wait till my grandbabies die, you would see how within a portion of the population. And I'm noticing here, I'm not saying everyone in a population is like this. You don't need everyone in a population to have this perspective. If you have, 3% of the population has this perspective, that's enough to almost inevitably lead to a revolt. So here you might be saying, okay, well, almost every time they're taken into a Jewish majority country or a Muslim majority country, they start trying to kill people. Why don't we just take them into Western countries, right? Well, Denmark attempted that. In 1992, they took in 321 individuals. 204 of the 321 refugees, 64%, had been convicted of a crime by 2019. And that's defined as serving serious fine or jail time and excluded traffic violations. Descendants. Okay, so you can be like, okay, well, this is just the first generation. Well, no, it's not. Of the next generation, 34% who were born in Denmark also had been convicted of a crime by 2019. And keep in mind, like, that's including the ones who are too young to have committed a crime. I would note here, when you're contrasting this 64% conviction rate, if you look at only men in Denmark, the conviction rate is only 2%, and that's if you're looking at the highest crime demographic, 15 to 64. And then if you're like, okay, well, at least they're not an enormous drain on the state, well, it turned out that by 2011, 82% of the group was on some form of public support. So essentially, even intergenerationally, they just become parasites of the state. In terms of employment, if you search for immigrants by Lebanon, which is often where the Palestinian immigrants were categorized, so keep in mind this isn't like as concentrated a sample set. In Denmark, only 43% of the men and 23% of the women aged 30 to 60 were employed. So less than even 50% of the men and almost none of the women. And if you want to come to me to be like, well, are you saying that they can't change or they can't improve? And I'm like, I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is the stats. When they've gone to these countries, they started killing people. When they've gone to these countries, they've become an enormous drain on state resources. So first, when people say Gazans are poor and live in poverty because Israel is doing all these horrible things to them, I'd point out that even in environments like Denmark, we see the same thing and we see similar behavioral patterns. Press F to doubt. Also, I'm not saying this is in their nature. I'm not saying this is an inevitability of who they are. I'm saying this is what has happened every time. And with that history, I'm not going to sit here and pressure other states to take a population that has repeatedly victimized the populations of states that have done kindnesses to them in the past. But it helps understand why, while the people across the Middle East support, the quote unquote like Palestinian cause, governments across the Middle East want nothing to do with these populations and are actually quite terrified of them. And I'd be like, I have a lot of friends who are like, I'd call them, I guess you could say like elitist or power player, like Muslim types in like Middle Eastern environments. And behind closed doors, the general vibe or conversation is Israel's doing the world a favor right now. And they want the most extreme outcome to be the outcome that happens. And they are trying to pressure Israel actually into a position where that's what ends up happening without it looking like that's what they're doing to their people. Because, no, keep in mind, like, Gazans have tried to assassinate like multiple heads of state in the past. Like, if you're a head of state in the Middle East, this is like a band of like agitators and assassins from your perspective. And so you want to play both sides while geopolitically doing what you can to achieve a certain outcome. So one is understanding why this happened, understanding what the protesters understood and what they didn't understand. Because it's clear they didn't understand this. They didn't understand how much and why the Egyptian government was just not even going to begin to allow them to protest. But another thing that we often get wrong is this was not even a majority Western or woke audience. The caravan
Right.
actually had multiple factions, with some of them coming from Islamic majority countries like Tunisia.
Yeah. Yes, right. What was with this? I saw that there was this big Tunisian contingent, but why?
They never got out of Tunisia, by the way, and we'll get into why that happened as well. Oh, before I get further, we've also got to talk about like the hypocrisy of all of this. For example, a leading figure in this who we'll see throughout this is an Irish politician who is gay and has a husband, and removed all of that and the pride flags from his social media before going to Egypt, which I think sort of shows this understanding that he's fighting for people who would have him killed and imprisoned.
Well, this is something that I do want to explore too, though. That I mean, we're talking about over 4,000 activists from more than 80 countries, and you know it's a lot. You know, people are flying from between 5 hours to over 20 hours to get to this. They're spending a lot of money to do this. It's hard to get anyone to come out and do
Yeah,
something.
and they ended up getting like left in the hot sun to get terrible sunburns.
We have just been violently dragged into the buses here at the first checkpoint.
Well, and I think that, you know, most of them weren't shocked by this. They kind of expected to be met with resistance, and that was part of the like.
No, they
It's a feature, not a
expected to
bug.
be met with US or UK style resistance, not
Mm.
Egyptian style resistance.
Okay, fair
They
on
thought they
that
were
front,
gonna
but
be
they
like
knew
LA
the
rioters.
risks. I still think it's really notable that in an age of more ennui than I think we've had before, this many people are putting this much on the line, even if just their money and time, to come out and engage in this. And they know that it wasn't going to be comfortable. They're coming out with, you know, these backpacks and like really expecting to, you know, do a sort of
No, but
rugged thing.
they're also coming out with their phones for selfies and to talk on social media. And
Yeah,
to-
I mean, yes, there is clout chasing, absolutely. But again, we're still talking 4,000
Simone,
people.
this is the Riviera of clout chasing. This is the Gaza border, okay?
Was
if
this
you're-
the fire festival of protests?
This was a fire festival of clout chasing. That is
Okay.
exactly what this was. And that's what makes it so interesting.
Oh God.
All right. Pro-Palestinian activists rally in Tunisia before departing for Egypt as part of the Global March to Gaza, Convoy June 2025. Their shirts read, "All eyes on Rafah," highlighting the goal of opening Gaza's Rafah border. In early 2025, as Israelis' war on Gaza intensified and a full blockade starved the enclave, international activists organized a global march on Gaza. Their aim was to pressure world leaders to end what they described as a quote-unquote genocidal siege. The plan was unprecedented in scale. Thousands of people from dozens of countries would converge in Egypt to march on the Rafah crossing on Gaza's border to demand the entry of humanitarian aid. The initiative was spearheaded by groups across the ideological spectrum, from woke Western peace activists to Arab civil society groups. A coalition of Tunisian organizations, including the country's labor union and human rights league, led a caravan called the Samud Convoy, which deported Tunisia on June 9th, 2025, picking up supporters in Algeria and Libya. In parallel, grassroots networks like the Palestinian Youth Movement Code Pink and Jewish Voice from Labor helped rally around 4,000 foreign activists from 50 to 80 countries to fly into Cairo by June 12th. And I love the Jews who whine about this stuff, and almost none of them are above replacement. You're not really Jew. Like, you don't have an invested interest in the future of the Jewish people if you and your kids are not above replacement rate, and so it's really just sort of this ultimate, I think, betrayal of Jewish identity to, put the actual Jewish people who will continue to exist in the future at such a threat. Goals and expectations. Organizers made clear their protest was symbolic. They did not truly expect to walk into Gaza. I will note here, some protesters believed that. Other protesters clearly thought they were going to get into Gaza, see the above section, given the fortified border. And I'll put a picture of how fortified the border is here. It is comical to think they would ever get through if they had looked at pictures of this. I mean, I guess they thought that they just politically pressure them. But again, they thought that they were dealing with like LA anti-rioters. I don't even think they thought they were dealing with that. They thought that they were dealing with like partially sympathetic, like Muslim police or something. These people had no sympathy. Some of them had their,
Well, even if they did, I think they're much more concerned about taking care of their families and job security than they are about, well, this foreigner who's screaming at me in English and a translator is now also trying to scream at me. They've convinced me. I will put my family on the line
if
and
these
lose my
people
job.
started with explanations of why this time wouldn't be like the time when Hamas blew up the wall and the country was flooded by Gazans and a bunch of people died, or the time the Gazans tried to start a revolt, or the time the Gazans, started killing, or the time, and we'll get into all of that in a second. But like, they didn't even like address the point that whenever this has happened in the past, Gazans start killing people in other Muslim majority countries. Some even described it as standing on the right side of history by bearing witness to Gaza's suffering. The marchers planned to travel by bus from Cairo to Sinai, city of Al-Arish, then undertake a roughly 50-kilometer, 3-day march on foot to the Rafah crossing, camping near the border before returning to Cairo on June 19th. Crucially, organizers sought advanced permission from Egypt. They say they applied through the Egyptian embassies weeks beforehand, hoping the government would quietly tolerate the protests. So the government never replied, and that's why they thought they might quietly tolerate them. In public comments, the group emphasized that the march would be peaceful and humanitarian, focused solely on opening aid corridors, not on any unlawful entry. That was never going to happen if you understood the geopolitics of the region. Despite these intentions, many observers question the marchers' realism. Egypt classifies the Rafah border zone in North Sinai as a restricted military area, off limits to outsiders without special permit.
Oh,
The Gaza
dear.
border is fortified with concrete walls, barred with wire, and heavily armed checkpoints. And if you're like, Egypt can't really be that afraid of the Gazan people. Like, they can't really view them as like insane monsters who just randomly murder anyone who they live next to. Look at the size of this wall. Look at the number of layers, and look at the size of this wall. This isn't like the Berlin Wall. This is people who are terrified of this is Attack on Titan stuff, okay? That is what the Egyptians put up out of fear of what you see as starving, harmless children or something on the other side.
Not to say that there are not starving, harmless children on the other side, which makes me all the more angry about what Hamas does.
Right, but the point being here is if you're ever like, come on, other Muslim countries aren't actually that terrified of the Gazans. They don't actually see them as that different from other Muslim populations, do they? Look at the size of these walls. Look at the security measures. Look at the number of troops on this border. This is not like us where we're like, we would really prefer that fewer Mexicans come in taking our jobs. No. This is like, you're trying to keep out like this is like the wall from like Game of Thrones. This is like, there is something truly terrifying on the other side of this wall from the perspective of the Egyptian government. I point this out because Egypt isn't exactly a country with tons of money to spare. This is a very honest signal of just how threatening in terms of their defense budget the Egyptian government found the Gazan people. To give you more context here is the Tyrannosaurus enclosure from Jurassic Park. And here is the wall between Gaza and Egypt.
Now, by the way, they weren't trying to bring in Gazas to... Sorry, they weren't trying to bring in...
to open the border.
To bring in aid.
Like, if you look at the majority of the Egyptian population, for the way, and we'll get to this in a second, they actually support Gaza. Egypt, out of all Arab countries, if you're looking at the base population, they wanted the highest supports for the Palestinian people. It'd be a win for the government to give them aid. The government is intentionally not giving them aid. You need to ask, when you see walls this big, and you see a government risking this level of disruption from its own people, a government that has no love for Israel, what are they trying to do to whatever's on the other side of that wall? Like, what is the goal of the Egyptian government and why? And I think that this is something that other people just like aren't asking. They're like, oh, they just don't care, or they're just playing it safe, or no, they have an intention. Or it's that they genuinely believe that they'll get through. But I think it might be, as I've said before, that they have an intention, from what I know from, elite level sort of Muslim people who I've talked with about this, and their perceptions on, for the region, the best end state for this conflict.
So are you saying the genocide call is not coming from Israel so much as it's coming from like all neighboring countries?
Yes.
Oh God.
the leadership of all neighboring countries.
Right. Yeah, not necessarily the people, because
I mean, like,
people
keep
are
in mind
nice.
Jordan, for example, like their king had Gazans try to assassinate him. You think he doesn't have like worry
a little
about
bit of
that?
a beef. Yeah, like maybe some concern.
And we'll go into like all the neighboring countries, but the leaders of neighboring countries have either been killed or tried to be killed by Gazan rebellions. They're not doing this out of nowhere. It's not out of like hatred for the Gazans. It's out of what's happened before. And so these giant fences, this terror that apparently Egypt has around this is not, and I would say it's not unwarranted. I might have distaste for the way that they're forcing Israel into this position. And obviously Iran is the one who instigated all of this, right? You know, by funding this, by funding Hamas, by training them, by, well, them and what was it, Qatar. We have our video on how Qatar is actually the biggest like dollar funder for Hamas, and also the biggest dollar funder for our university system out in terms of foreign institutions. Have you ever asked yourself why Claudine Gay said the things she said about Jews? She's the one who runs Harvard, that she wasn't sure if it was a human rights violation for people to say that the Jews needed to be eradicated. See, that seems like a controversial saying to say to Congress. Is there somebody she might have been trying to appease more than Congress? Oh, her number one donor? Good job, because it's also Hamas's.
Oh, goodness gracious.
But anyway, some critics wondered, what did these foreigners think would happen when they reached Rafah? Would the gate simply swing open? Organizers insist that they were not naive. One activist told the AP, "We do not expect to be allowed into Gaza," acknowledging they might only hold a protest at the checkpoint. Nonetheless, this strategy banked on moral spectacle. If thousands marched, perhaps Egypt's leadership, which officially sympathizes with Gaza, again, I said they officially sympathize, so why no aid, would relent, or world opinion would force a breakthrough. In hindsight, this gamble on goodwill that ignored some of the hard realities of regional geopolitics, as the marchers would soon discover. So again, I note here, for me, the biggest thing on the ground, for anyone who's like, Malcolm, you're exaggerating. I mentioned this above, but just like seriously, I want people to think about this. You're exaggerating how scared the other governments in this region are, or how much they fear the people of Gaza as a cultural group. Look at these fortifications. I don't think I've seen fortifications this intense standing on any border on Earth. These dwarf what I saw on the North Korean to South Korean border. These dwarf what I saw. Now, that's a heavily mined area, so it's not really comparable. But there is just these dwarf the Berlin Wall, for example. This is a clearly put up. And it's not like the fortifications on the Israeli border, which were actually fairly modest compared to the ones on the Egyptian border. I think because the Israelis were fairly complacent about this partially, and they wanted to look like good guys. So they didn't actually put them in a cage. Whereas the other neighbors are like, no, this is a cage. This is a cage like the Tyrannosaurus cage in Jurassic Park. Like, if you were trying to judge the dangerousness of the dinosaur, we have Tyrannosaurus level cage here.
So in other words, this utter failure of the March on Gaza, the Fire Festival of protests, could have been avoided if the 4,000 plus people who decided to join thought a little bit more about what the leadership of surrounding nations felt about more porous borders with Gaza.
No, I think they knew what they felt. I think that they thought...
They still went for clout. They just thought that it would be easier.
No, what they thought, because they had gotten used to the way the United States handles protests, that their protests, or UK handles protests, or Norway handles protests, that their protests would be handled like the protests in those countries. Or at the very most, like the protests in LA in the United States.
Humanely, right? Sort of like, I guess, Greta Thunberg made the more smart approach by getting caught by the Israelis. Yeah, and they gave her sandwiches, and they kept them safe.
They fed her and kept her, and she couldn't even think when they're like, "What horrors did you undergo?" And she's like, "I don't even want to talk about it."
Well, yeah,
which clearly means nothing. And of course, she wants to talk about it.
Well, no. I mean, she emphasized that nothing, and this is the talking point of everyone who's being interviewed is what they're experiencing comes nothing close to what those in Gaza are experiencing. I don't disagree, but the primary indignity that she suffered was that they were stopped from doing this. She really didn't have anything else she could
that
say.
she's ignoring is she was sailing into an Egyptian set up beforehand exclusion zone, and the Egyptians would have the Israelis literally saved her from what happened to these other protesters.
Yeah, honestly, yeah, she was so lucky. She was so
She was
lucky they
so
were
lucky
intercepted.
that the Israelis went out and saved her.
Yeah, actually,
And
she
then
did have a complaint about them, was that they were not allowed to leave the boat after
that she wouldn't even watch the videos of what happened on the day was so like gross to me. Like willfully keeping yourself ignorant. She must have watched hundreds of videos of atrocities on the other side, but she wouldn't watch a single video of what was happening to the hostages.
Oh, on October 7th? I thought she did watch. She didn't
No,
watch.
she refused to watch any of them. She has no idea. Like, apparently she's never seen any videos of what happened on October 7th. And she fastidiously refuses to watch any because she considers them propaganda. It's not odd. It's leftist. Leftists see one side is evil, one side is good. Don't blur your mind with the gray morality or anything like that. Don't bother yourself with what's currently happening to the hostages. Anyway, arrival in Cairo. So we're going to go to the timeline now. The international activists began landing in Cairo around June 11th to 12th, 2025, and immediately ran into resistance. Egyptian authorities had gotten wind of the plans and launched a preemptive crackdown. Dozens of known activists were detained upon arrival at Cairo airport, questioned, and put on the next flights out. Over 2 days, at least 73 foreign nationals were summarily deported to Istanbul on Turkish airline flights, and by June 12th, Egyptian security had compiled lists of march participants at local hotels. Plainclothes officers showed up at hotels in Cairo, interrogated guests, and even confiscated their phones, according to organizers. By June 13th, groups estimated over 200 activists from the US, Europe, and North Africa had been detained or questioned in Egypt, with up to 100 more awaiting deportation. The Egyptian government gave no official welcome to the global march. No kidding. Instead, it quietly instructed airlines that between June 12th and 16th, all inbound Cairo passengers must hold return tickets to facilitate expelling unwanted visitors. Do you see how, like, the US government needs to handle protesters this way? Just disappearing them, sending them back to where they're coming from.
I do, yeah. Now I'm thinking about the LA riots, and how those have played out, and also how different people are covering them. So I hear on the All In podcast that the ICE raids that have taken place are being very misrepresented, that they actually are going after criminal enterprises. So apparently, for example, some fashion business was raided, but it was like a money laundering front. No one's talking about that.
Like protesters complaining of like human trafficking orgs where people were being raided and like.
Yeah. And so that, like, I think people are given these very skewed reports on what's happening.
Well, it's not reports. It's they intentionally blind themselves to information on the other side, which is why I'm trying to give all the information on both sides here.
I appreciate that.
It's that they're Greta Thunberging it. They're saying, I won't watch any video of the atrocities Hamas committed.
Yeah. I mean, I was just watching Tyler Bender, a YouTuber who leans left, just talking, like, almost like starting to cry as she was talking about how disturbed she was by the LA protests and what's going on with the ICE raids. And yeah, I'm realizing how siloed we are with information, that I'm here on one side being like, like this is a complicated situation, and people are being deported, but this is what the majority of people voted for, and this is also completely in alignment with enforcing US laws. And on the other hand, she has this perception that, I don't know, we're entering some fascist dictatorship, and we just have, it's just crazy how differently we view reality. And I'm glad that you are trying to look on both sides.
We try to look at information from both sides, and they look at information from only one side, which is why we're going through this today. I hope I've already dispelled the rumor that these people didn't know what was going to happen at all. They miscalculated something, and what they miscalculated is that they were going into an authoritarian dictatorship, and they thought that they were going into a democracy.
Right. So if I'm to recap here, one, they expected to get social credit and clout for going out and being seen to have appeared in person for this epic protest. And two, do you think, I don't think they actually expected to get any aid through, right? They just expected to be like
Well, they
valiantly
thought they
arrested
might
and then
be
sent
able to
back.
get them to maybe send some aid or like just pressure the Egyptian government. But they definitely
Ah,
did not expect this. They
okay.
didn't expect to be, and we're going to continue with what
Beaten.
happened to them,
Yeah.
systemically dismantled, removed, and disappeared back to their countries of origin.
Mm-hmm.
Despite the dragnet, hundreds of marchers managed to enter Egypt and regroup. On June 13th, they attempted to set out to Cairo towards Sinai by road as planned. Several buses and taxis carrying activists, including a 50-person Irish delegation led by People Before Profit, TD Paul Murphy.
Now, this is the gay legislator from.
Yeah.
Okay.
Departed for the Suez Canal Highway. Murphy
Okay.
was initially optimistic. Upon landing, he posted, "Nobody is being detained or deported. Pressure on the Egyptian government is clearly working." I love this optimism. This optimism was short-lived. About 30 kilometers outside Cairo, at a highway toll station near Islamabad, Egyptian police sprung a trap. Roadblocks and checkpoints abruptly halted the convoy. Officers in riot gear ordered all foreigners off the vehicles, seizing passports and preventing anyone without an Egyptian ID from proceeding.
Oh,
Approximately 40 activists from France, Spain, Canada, Turkey, and the UK and beyond were herded off and held in the desert heat at this makeshift checkpoint.
Sounds
Quote,
unpleasant.
"They are being held in the heat and not allowed to move." The march organizers reported a
This
statement
is
that
fire
morning.
festival of protest. My God.
And you if you see pictures of them, they have these horrible sunburns.
Yes, yes. I just keep seeing these images of sweaty, very deeply uncomfortable looking people.
No, I mean, this was clearly meant to sort of torture them for.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, this is something that, and we'll get to this in a bit. While the Egyptian people overwhelmingly support Gaza, it turns out, and the Egyptian government was right about this, they hate Westerners trying to impose themselves on Egyptian foreign policy more than they like Gaza.
Okay.
And so these foreigners coming in there and whining and trying to force them, they just see this as cultural imperialism, which is exactly
I could also
what
see
it
it
is.
being insulting, of being like, yeah, I'm not cool with this. Why are you implying that I am? Being kind of insulting. Like,
Well,
I can't do anything about this.
We're doing what we can given our circumstances, but the government apparently actually like ended up winning more popular support based on all of this because the people were so happy with how the protesters were basically
the deportation of sanctimonious Westerners.
Yes, the deportation and
wow. So this has just been a win for the Egyptian government.
Yeah, just a win for the Egyptian government, just a total. Well, because they also handled this very effectively. And in a way that really works for people who hate sanctimonious Westerners. And they've done a good job in terms of the play to keep out all of the Arabs who they also handled, because they handled them before they got into Egypt. And we'll get to how they handled that in a second.
Okay.
Confrontation on the highway. As word spread that the march was blocked, tension spiked. Sun activists attempted a sit-down protest on the road, refusing to turn back. Oh, that is so dumb in Egypt. You haven't been to Egypt. Drivers there, one of the craziest things for me in Egypt, like if you talk about bad drivers, I've never seen any place, or like insane drivers, you could like do a turn off from like a highway.
Okay.
And you'd have somebody drive the opposite way up the turn off, like skid by you.
What?
Then just start going on the highway in the wrong direction.
What? But
yeah.
Is there just no traffic enforcement?
In Egypt, I saw this happen in Egypt when I was like, how is this normal? And I want to say I saw it more than once when I was there, but I definitely remember seeing it at least once. And it was like, it reminded me of the Egypt baggage claim area where they scan the bags. And it's so disorderly that people will, like the machines regularly get like stuffed, because people will try to stuff their bags next to other people's bags. And so like the entrance will have like 5 bags shoved in it because nobody wants to wait and there's like no lines.
Oh.
But what I'm saying here is when you consider a culture like that and you think you're going to sit on a road and they're not going to be like, Carmageddon, they are.
Oh,
they're just going to run you right over.
Oh no.
I mean, it shows I didn't study Egyptian culture before this. Especially if you're some sanctimonious Westerner that just earns them, free drinks for a year at the local pub. Not that they drink because Muslims. Hookah, I guess. Whenever I go to Muslim countries, I always do the hookah thing. Video footage described by participants shows a chaotic scene. Protesters chanting and sitting on the asphalt as armed police surround them and water bottles and other objects flying towards the crowd. Allegedly, it's thrown by government-hired thugs mingled with security forces. So if you actually watch what happens, it's pretty clear that these are locals and not government thugs.
Yeah,
And
I don't know why. Yeah, because there's lots of footage of plainclothes people doing the more egregious harassment.
you tried to do a
Weird.
sit-down protest blocking roads in Egypt.
Mm.
They don't do
It's not
that
gonna go
there.
well. Yeah.
Egyptian people are gonna throw things at you, and it'll be a fun day because the police are gonna let them. And there's a
Yeah, I guess that's the big difference. Is in the United States, you'd be charged with assault and battery.
oh no, the police are like, you go, like there's videos of like little kids like coming out and trying to like whip the protesters, having a blast. Because to them, these people are just pure evil. They are imperialism and colonialism made manifest because they don't do these types of protests in Egypt. This would never happen in Egypt. One, because you're likely to just get run over. Unfortunately for these protesters, the cops came before that, right? But then once the cops are there, okay, well, now you're open season for townsfolk because they're angry that you're blocking their way to work and nobody's going to stop them from throwing water bottles and whipping you. So now you're the town's local activity for the day.
God. Wow.
Egyptian officers did not hesitate to use force. Witnesses say riot police charged the demonstrators, and the plainclothes agents began physically dragging activists into the buses to be shipped back to Cairo. And I'll note here that one of the things that the right is getting wrong is they think that the reason why the people of Egypt were mad about this, like the average people, the plainclothes people were mad about this, is because there isn't like this pan-Muslim solidarity, that these people didn't care about the people of Gaza. No, they do. They just hate you more. Okay.
Yeah.
And they also knew that everything that you were trying is pointless. And so why not have fun ragging on imperialists, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
We have
That
had
makes
our
sense.
passport. Yeah. Sorry.
I'm just saying that makes sense because everyone's kind of right. It's just that people didn't fully do their homework. Or I guess we have another issue of your theory of the left playing out, which is that people are going to make the most morally comfortable interpretation of a situation. So the most morally comfortable interpretation of how this protest is going to play out is that, oh, well, we know for a fact the Egyptian people, not the government maybe, but the people support Gaza. And therefore, the most morally comfortable interpretation of how they're going to behave is they will welcome us who also hold that opinion with open arms.
Yeah.
Instead of like, there is a possibility that these people may have a bias against us that we would even say could be slightly racist or nationalist.
Yeah. I mean, this is the type
Or
of
at
place
least
where gay people
xenophobic.
get thrown from roofs.
Right.
And they're like, well, come on, you don't actually hate our way of life that much more than even the Israeli. Oh, you do? Oh, no. But anyway, no, but there's this delusion, right? Like, that they're on the same tide, and they're not. They're useful idiots when they're within their own countries. When they come to these other countries, there's nothing but colonizers. So, quote,
tourists. Yeah. Yeah.
we have had our passports confiscated and are being detained. Murphy managed to post to his social media from the standoff, calling it a blatant crackdown on the Great March to Gaza. What a sanctimonious turd. Within hours, the highway was cleared of protesters, many bruised and some in tears, as multiple busloads of detained marchers were escorted under guard back towards Cairo. One Dutch participant recounted some of his group were beaten up by the police, coming back battered, bruised, and broken. Well, these are a developing country that's fascist under like military rules police. Of course. You are so lucky you didn't go to an Egyptian prison. You lucky bastard. Even as they were being driven away, some activists continued to plead with Egyptian officers. Where is your heart? One British woman shouted in a widely shared clip. But to no avail. I mean, of course not. You don't understand the situation on the ground. And these sorts of where is your heart? That is not how Muslims communicate this. They're like, that is not how they communicate their support of the Gazan people. They're not like, oh, where is your heart? They're like, hey, we're in this together to kill the Jews. If you had gone out there and said, let's kill the Jews together, you would have found a very different response. You just forgot what their ultimate goal is. No, and I mean this very seriously. I think that if the
Really?
protesters had started saying a bunch of anti-Semitic stuff, they would have had a very different response.
You really think so? Oh my
Then
gosh.
crying, oh, where is your heart? If they'd started to be like, we need to get the Jews, we need to get rid of them, we need to handle this. Some of the people in the crowd would be like, these people are speaking truth. We might need to let them through. And it's because they haven't listened to why the average person in Egypt supports the Gazans. It's not for the reason they support the Gazans, okay? It's not for the reason they support the Gazans. Notable incidents. The clash at Islamia was marked by several dramatic moments. Sky News footage shows Egyptian riot police manhandling protesters on the road, and Paul Murphy described how in the fray, an American woman was in his group, was badly kicked and beaten, her hijab torn off by police. Well, I mean, Egyptian agents also seized Murphy's phone midstream as he tried to document the scene. His last message before the phone cut out said, "Violence got worse after they seized my phone. They're taking us south, then west towards Cairo." For a time, several dozen marchers, including Murphy, were held up incommunicato on those buses as they were ferried back under guard to the capital. This prompted diplomatic scrambling. Ireland's embassy and others negotiated behind the scenes. And by the next day, June 14th, Egypt had released some detainees in Cairo rather than immediately deporting them. Murphy confirmed that he and a few others were back in a Cairo hotel by Saturday, meeting shortly to decide next steps, he says. However, Egyptian authorities kept the pressure on. Activists reported plainclothes police tailing them in Cairo, of course. And another roundup on Sunday 15th, where some tried to quietly arrange to travel towards Sinai again. I love they're trying to get past these police, but we need police like this. We need police like the police we have in Florida, because we do have police like this in the U.S. They know what's up. I got to post that video of the Florida police chief.
Oh gosh.
We got this, just not in L.A. You know, we need the L.A. police chief saying this stuff.
If you resist lawful orders, you're going to jail. Let me be very clear about that. If you block an intersection or a roadway in Brevard County, you are going to jail. If you flee arrest, you're going to go to jail tired, because we are going to run you down and put you in jail. If you try to mob rule a car in Brevard County, gathering around it, refusing to let the driver leave, in our county, you're most likely going to get run over and dragged across the street. If you spit on us, you're going to the hospital and in jail. If you hit one of us, you're going to the hospital and jail, and most likely get bitten by one of our big, beautiful dogs that we have here. If you throw a brick, a firebomb, or point a gun at one of our deputies, we will be notifying your family where to collect your remains at, because we will kill you graveyard dead. We're not going to play. This has got to stop.
Your family will be called for to pick up your remains. Big, beautiful dogs. That man.
Murphy was detained a second time on June 16th, along with others, according to his political party. By that point, it was clear that the march would never reach Gaza. Egyptians' crackdown had effectively dismantled the protests before it even left Egyptian soil. Now, what happened to the Samad? The land convoy waved Palestinian flags from a bus as they journeyed through Libya towards Egypt. This is June 10th, 2025. This North African caravan of around 1,500 activists, so they were smaller, but still very large.
Yeah, it's a lot of, again, this is a lot of people to actually do something that takes effort. Leave the house.
But it too was stopped short of the border. The Tunisian Arab convoy. In the meantime, the parallel land convoy from North Africa also ran into obstacles. This convoy had grown to 1,000 to 1,500 people in a multi-bus caravan by the time it crossed Tunisia, Libya. After an enthusiastic send-off in Tunisia, where crowds waved Palestinian flags and chanted solidarity slogans, Samad traversed Libya's western regions with the intention to reach Egypt by June 15th. But on June 12th, when the convoy reached the city of Sirte in central Libya, it was barred from further travel by the authorities of the eastern Libyan government, General Haftar's factions. Haftar is an ally of Egypt's government, and his forces informed the convoy that Egypt had denied them entry. Therefore, you will not pass, as one organizer quoted local officials. The convoy was allowed to camp on the outskirts of Sirte while awaiting quote-unquote permission, but that approval never came. I love how they just wait them out and stuff like that. It's a perfect way to handle them. Be like, you just need to wait for permission. Just wait out there in the desert. and we'll come and let you know in a
Yeah,
few
it's
days.
uniquely trolly. Yeah, they clearly, because they could have just sent them away.
They could have
Right,
just sent them away. And
they
they're
hit
like,
the border.
no. But it's a great way to de-escalate, right? Like, it reminds me of the 30 Rock, like the pilots always say, wait 30 minutes. You know, just wait a little bit and we'll come back. By late June 12th to 13th, Samad's leaders knew they were effectively stuck in Libya. We didn't cross 2,000 kilometers, all for nothing, exclamation mark. One frustrated organizer shouted to the gathered crowd in Sirte. Yet, in reality, they had. Egypt's security influence extended beyond its borders, enlisting Libyan allies to prevent mass Arab marchers from showing up at Egypt's doorstep. So I found this to be really fascinating as well. That was quite well played by Egypt, because it would have been an issue optically if they had a bunch of Arab people there as well. Instead of what's been all over social media, it's a bunch of woke-looking urban monoculture. I mean, I've never seen a perfect depiction of the urban monocultures and what these protesters look like.
So they're sort of also strategic in who they let get far, and then essentially
handled. Yeah, these annoying Irish guys and the, you know, all these sanctimonious turds.
The ones that, even Gaza sympathetic Egyptians would say, okay, I don't object.
Yeah. So no significant group of activists ever made it to the border.
Wow. So this just utterly failed. I guess where you and I differ in the expectations of these groups as they were planning and coming out, and at least over $4,000. Sorry, over 4,000 people.
So don't go too long.
But like, you thought they were going to make it. I really don't think they thought they were going to make it. I think maybe they thought they'd be comfortably set away. And honestly, if anything, that they would just go on a nice vacation from wherever they got deported. Like maybe taking off from the Istanbul airport, which is such a good hub airport. That's my assumption here. You really don't think so?
Keep in mind how many times they tried to reorganize the protest over and over again. They were trailed. They were then arrested. They then, no matter how bad things got, they kept trying to reorganize this, even though they knew they could end up in Egyptian prisons, which is a big deal.
Oof. Okay, keep going then. Wow.
A few Egyptian citizens, tried to show solidarity, but were quickly restrained. For example, a few Egyptian activists rallied outside of Journalist Syndicate in Cairo on June 12th to support the march, only to face police.
Oh, okay.
Any hopes that, quote unquote, the people would simply surge to Rafah was firmly quashed by state power. Okay, so accusations of treachery versus solidarity. The march's failure sparked a war of narratives. Pro-Palestinian activists accused Egypt of betrayal, given Egypt itself portrays itself as Gaza's lifeline. Online hashtags like "Shame on you, Sisi" trended in Arab activist circles, condemning Egyptian regime for harassing those trying to feed Gaza. They cited Egypt's complicity in the siege. For example, Egypt has often kept Rafah closed except for limited aid, aligning with Israel's blockade. One Algerian marcher detained in Cairo lamented, Arab leaders pay lip service to the Palestinians, but crush anyone who actually tries to help. Why? Like, these people need to ask why. Are they just meanies? On the flip side, Egyptian state media defended the crackdown and painted the marchers as either naive or provocateurs. Some local commentators suggested that if the foreigners really wanted to help Gaza, they should protest in Tel Aviv or Washington, not Egypt. And that really would have aligned with the Egyptian people's view. Like, why are you blocking our streets? Why are you disrupting our lives? And the leftists have gotten used to trying to protest the people who they think agrees with them more. This has become a common thing where, like, in the United States, the leftist Palestinian protesters often will much more frequently protest progressive politicians than protest conservative politicians. But they actually almost never protest conservative politicians. And I think that they tried to apply this to a global scale, thinking, well, Egypt will be more sympathetic to us than Israel will. And that's just wrong. That's like patently shows a misunderstanding of the two countries' stances. They would have found a much warmer reception in Israel. This view, essentially, take your protest to the right address, resonated with Egyptians who resented Western meddling. Even some ordinary Egyptians, supportive of Gaza in principle, felt the march risked spectacle that could have backfired by drawing Israeli ire or chaos to Egypt. Thus, the aftermath largely saw the Egyptian government come out on top, and really all the activists did was reinforce the government's position that aid and traversal on the border should be extremely limited. Inside Egypt, the government's firm response likely played well with the regime's priorities. Sisi's administration portrayed the event as proof of its vigilance. There was no such significant backlash, so no backlash happened in Egypt, a fact that might surprise outsiders until one considers Egypt's political climate. Under Sisi, public protests are virtually outlawed, which is why they would have seen them as so upsetting and arrogant. Most Egyptians have been depoliticized or silenced under the fear of arrest. And also, when a government has this kind of power, sometimes depoliticizing can be nice when you've had a lot of political violence over the last few decades, which is, what happened here. And if anything, Sisi used this to burnish his strongman image, showing he can stand up to foreign pressure and maintain order. So these people basically came in as like a face for like foreign pressure, even though no foreign government was behind them. And it made him look like he was able to stand up to like the US and the UK and everything like that in a way that made him look good in front of his people, like the broader urban monoculture. These people sort of represented like the UN, for example, which they really do in terms of a viewpoint. Now, I'll also note here that overall, Egypt is very pro-Gaza. 97% of Egyptians agreed that all Arab states should sever ties with Israel in protest of its actions in Gaza.
Wow.
And 96% believed Egypt should send more humanitarian aid to Palestinians. 96% of people believe this. And yet they still lost popular support by doing American-style protests.
Wow.
Now, as to why governments do not want to take in Gazan refugees, let's go over a few instances just looking at Egypt. 2008, Hamas-led breach at Rafah, 200 to 700K crossed.
That's a lot. Wow.
That's
so it sounds like Egypt let them come through at that point because
no, they blew up the giant walls and they raced through. Like they had pre-planned it. They let the people know we're blowing up the walls, and then the people flooded in. If you can imagine, this would be like you're right next to like a country that is known for violence or something like that. Like imagine we were right next to Haiti or something, except Haiti was giant and somebody blew up the walls between us and Haiti, and 200,000 to 700,000 came in. Or imagine like Joe Biden imported that many people. What I'm saying is like, it's not like culturally the Egyptians are like, these people are not like us, and we don't want to let them in. And so this is something that Egypt, it caused major issues. There were a lot of death tied to this. There were like, this is something that the Egyptian people would have remembered and not thought fondly of.
Well, I mean, if okay, a lot of people crossing the border. You said what? Did you say 700,000? You didn't say 700,000.
700,000 to 200,000.
That's crazy. Okay, so obviously, deporting them would take time and a lot of work, but presumably they were systematically deported, right?
I think a lot of them ended up staying, forming. What often happens with Gazans, and we actually won't get into this today because we took in too much time, is when they move to other countries, they form ghettos where they become radicalized and then often attempt to attack the local governments.
Yeah, but wouldn't they try to take out those ghettos if indeed they are?
Maybe. I mean, the current government in Egypt is very effective, and I doubt many people would notice or care if the Gazan ghettos were being taken out. So 2014 to 2015, only a few years later, buffer zone expansion, tunnels flooded, thousands of homes destroyed, mass demolitions, forced evictions, 31 soldiers killed, large residential displacement. 2023 to 2025, Gaza war, medical evacuations, 2,200 wounded entered, strict vetting, humanitarian aid only. So this is like, from their perspective, we're strictly vetting who's coming in. We're just going to take in some wounded during the war. Now, if you're looking at the various insurrections they caused, you have Jordan, 1970 to 1971, attempted PLO-led overthrow, Black September, 3,000 to 5,000 people died. So this is 3,000 to 5,000 Jordanian citizens died. And they attempted to assassinate the monarch who let them in graciously, giving them places to live, creating communities for them. This is the way Gazans act. Like, there's a reason why other people aren't letting them in. There's a reason why these walls are giant. Lebanon, 1975 to 1990, civil war with Palestinian militias. Over 100,000 people died. PLO operated state within a state, sparked a sectarian war and tried to take over the Lebanese government. So over 100,000 people died because of their kindness to the Palestinian people, trying to let them in, or trying to give them a place to live.
Yeah, that's one of those patterns of fool me once, shame on me.
Oh, hold on. No, there's more.
Oh,
Syria.
What?
2011 to 2018. Civil war, Yarmouk siege and insurgency, 3,000 to 5,000 people. Palestinian faction split between regime and opposition. Now, what was interesting about this one is that mainstream administration actually brought in Palestinian refugees to act as soldiers for them, while some that were already in the country ended up splitting and going for the opposition faction. And this just sort of shows that even the faction is like, oh no, I need bloodthirsty people to kill my enemies. Where am I going to find the random mobs? Oh, I'll just import a bunch of Palestinians to kill people, which was the idea here. And it worked. Kuwait, 1991, mass expulsions and backlash. Hundreds of people died. PLO supported Saddam's invasion. Kuwait viewed it as betrayal. So in Kuwait, when Saddam attacked, the Palestinians who they had accepted into their country and treated as guests and got set up immediately turned traitor and sided with Saddam's regime. Again,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, they're not exactly people you want in your country. Libya, 1995 to 1996, mass expulsions, no uprising, political shift under Gaddafi led to backlash. So they just pushed them out before there was a major issue. But the point being is that when you look at this, you're like, oh, this is why the heads of these countries are terrified of these people coming in. This is why the walls between the two countries in Egypt look like not the piddly little walls between Egypt and Gaza, but they look like a multiplicative version of the Tyrannosaurus prints in Jurassic Park, which shows the threat that the Egyptian government perceives from this region.
I wonder, so if I were speaking with someone on the left, because the problem is that no one I've heard talk about Gaza has addressed this. If you could get someone to have, like, to this point in the conversation and say, well, what is a government to do given this track record? What do you think that like any one of these people who put their time and their money on the line to participate in this protest, what would they say?
The left will assume about reality whatever would be moral if true.
Okay.
So they will say it would be more moral if everyone was equally beautiful. So they'll say everyone is equally beautiful. It'd be more moral if that homeless guy was homeless because of stuff that was nothing to do with his fault. So they'll say, okay, nothing to do with his fault. It'd be more moral if everyone was born with equal capacity. So they'll say everyone is born equally capable. It's all just environment. They will say the only reason that the Gazans are doing this is because they've been wronged before, or because, that Israel is mean to them, and that has created this behavior in the Gaza people. And that if Israel just became super nice and all the Jews decided to leave and gave the country back to them. I don't really believe in that term, but I'm talking from a leftist perspective.
Right.
Because from my perspective, the people who were in Israel before the native population, the Jewish population, reclaimed it, were colonizers. They had, under the Ottoman Empire, forcibly deported the Jewish people in the same way the Americans did with like Native Americans. And it's always shocking to me that in the one region where like the native population has actually reconquered the region, they're like, no, like we need to give it back to the colonizers because the colonizers have the right skin tone. And it's like giving wherever you are in the world, in the United States, if like the Seminoles took back Florida, it would be really bloody. Like that's what it looks like, what the left is actually advocating for. And where it actually happened in one location in the world, they were like, oh no, reverse it. And they'll have things. I always talk about how like there's this leftist meme of like Mount Rushmore. And it's like, can you believe this like defaced Native American monument? Like, this is horrifying. And I'm like, that is like nothing compared to the Temple of the Rock, literally on top of the single and most holy site in all of Jerusalem as like a giant and intentional defacement of it. And the Jews within Jerusalem don't even move it. They don't get rid of it. They allow Muslims to still pray there. Like that shows an incredible amount of magnanimity when they're, have the Wailing Wall where they cry in restoration of their temple every day and they control this region, right? So I think that shows this is an area that was taken to them by a colonial force, a big empire, multiple big empires. There were multiple Arab empires and the Ottomans and stuff like that who took the region from them and it had various waves of deportations. It wasn't just, one wave of deportations. But, the thing is this to the left, that would be inconvenient if it was true. So they say it's not true. They say actually the Jews never really were in the area long enough, or, they, in their religious texts, it said they migrated to the region. The problem is that their genes show that they didn't. At least 50% of them are Canaanite in origin. So at least 50% of the Jewish population, and that's about as much as you can hope for like going back to the very beginning of human history, have been in the region since the very, very beginning of human history. And to say, okay, well, they don't want to believe any of that, right? So they will just take an interpretation of all these events, it'd be the most moral interpretation, which is, well, the Jews, because they won, and they must be the aggressors, and they must be the bad guys because they're not the right skin tone, and the people they're fighting against are weaker than them, and the weaker side is always the good guy because that's the way all our stories work, right? It couldn't possibly be that they keep committing atrocities or something like this. And if they are repeatedly committing atrocities, those atrocities must be due to the way they've been treated and not due to, that would be the...
Yeah, or that, like this, any uprising they had or any violence they committed was in response to apparently undocumented or suppressed or otherwise K-hold action taken against them, that they were only fighting back and that it was framed differently. Is that kind of how?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've heard what their narratives are on the Israeli-Palestinian historic relationship, and it's often mostly fictional. Israel really brought a number of really fair deals to the table about how the situation could be fixed. And when I say fair, I mean fair where the alternative wasn't get rid of the Jews. And every time they did, many deals that were quite generous to the Palestinians, the Palestinians basically said, no, it's get rid of the Jews. That's what we want. If you want to get a great and really funny short primer on the history of this situation, Drava Hadi, who does Unbiased Rome, which generally is pretty anti-Semitic in its takes, which I think shows that he's not, particularly sympathetic to the Jewish people and how he goes over this. He just finds the situation funny, how far they've bent over backwards, trying to create peace in the region. He did a piece on this called Unbiased Israel History, and it's really good, and I'd suggest you check it out if you like this channel and sort of the mix of information and humor.
But not even their constant tunnel building could stop Israel's quest for peace. In 1993, Israeli Prime Minister Rabin and Arafat, under the auspices of Bill Clinton, signed the Oslo Accords, giving the PLO recognition and tons of self-governance, just asking them to stop being terrorists in return. After a little trolling, later came Prime Minister Barak to finish the deal, offering 90% of the West Bank, many settlements to be destroyed, East Jerusalem, allowing many 1948 refugees to return. It was everything Palestinians could practically hope for. Arafat, with such a great offer for a Palestinian state at hand, he launched the Second Intifada and ensured a peace. Despite the Second Intifada being over, Arafat dying and Mr. Abbas succeeding him to power, Sharon's big Jewish heart still yearned for long-term peace. As a show of goodwill, he pulled all Israeli troops and settlements out of Gaza, and the Palestinians followed this up by using their newfound self-governance by voting for Hamas. Things then got too rowdy. The PLO kicked Hamas from the West Bank and kept an illegal hold on power, and Hamas bombed the PLO out of Gaza. The Gaza Strip was blockaded, unemployment rose to 50%, living standards crashed, and most money sent to Gaza was turned into rockets. So betrayed was Ariel Sharon, he fell into a permanent coma until his death.
I will note here, something I've heard a few times, which has always really shocked me, is comparing the Israeli situation right now to apartheid, which I've just found bizarre. A region in which some ethnicities are treated less than other ethnicities, are given specific restrictions when contrasted with other ethnicities, is not an apartheid-like region. That's an insult to apartheid. Within that, modern South Africa would be apartheid because, Elon Musk, despite being South African, can't do business there without, 30% of his business being owned by a black person, right? That would consider that apartheid. What we instead are seeing is when Israel was liberated by the colonizers who had, the various colonial Arab empires, whether it was the Ottomans or whether it was the various Arab waves of conquest, had extracted a lot of the Jewish population and attempted to replace them. In those periods, within Muslim law, there is sort of a second-class citizen status for non-Muslims, which is, in a way, a lot nicer than you have within a lot of Christian systems. So I'm not going to say, this is a horrible thing, but Jews did live as second-class citizens within that system. When they took over, if you look at Muslims living within Israel today, who are not within these regions that basically say, our goal is to eradicate the Jews, they have a much higher quality of living than Muslims in pretty much any other Muslim country I've gone to, except for the wealthy parts of Dubai and Qatar and stuff like that. And The reason for this is, yes, they do have some restrictions applied to them in the same way that like whites in South Africa today might have some restrictions applied to them, but they are less than even the restrictions in South Africa today. And I'd also note that the restrictions that were placed on Jews in Muslim-ruled Israel pre all of this were much less than the restrictions put on blacks in apartheid South Africa. So in both instances, it's lower, but I'm just pointing out that it was more restrictive before this if you don't include the territories where the stated goal of those territories is the eradication of the Jewish people. And from my perspective, to demand that the Jewish people let people who say my goal is the eradication of the Jewish people just freely roam their country, they do let Muslims live in their country and live quite well, which I would contrast here with almost every majority Muslim country on earth where most Jews would be killed if they attempted to live there, either by the state or by just the local population. You know, Muslims live in Israel, Jews don't live in Gaza. You know, Muslims live in Israel, Jews don't live in Iran. I find it absolutely laughable when I hear somebody be like, well, what about the Muslims who still have the keys to their homes in Jerusalem? And it's like, well, what about the Jews who still have the keys to their homes in any of those Muslim countries they were kicked out of, which they were kicked out of? Oh, you were unaware that that happened? Oh, and that it happened at greater numbers? Oh, okay. Why didn't you even think to look into that? Oh, because you're drip-fed a lie. So even if you personally aren't anti-Semitic, if you were unaware of this fact, you need to ask yourself, why would the people who control the information sources that you get information from hide this from you? By the way, if you're wondering about the exact numbers, in terms of Jews expelled from Muslim countries during that period, it was around 850,000 to 1 million. In regards to Palestinians who were expelled, it was 700,000 to 770,000. And if you're like, well, it's wrong either way, then why haven't you ever campaigned once about the Jews? They don't live in a lot of these Muslim majority countries. And that's what makes this demand so unfair to me. Oh, you have to let more Muslims live in Israel. Well, why not more Jews? Why don't you care that Jews get killed when they live in these other countries? Because you're anti-Semitic. I mean, it's very obvious that these people are just anti-Semitic, or that they simply haven't thought this through. To demand that they let not just Muslims, which they do, but Muslims who say that they want to eradicate them, that they have to let these people who say my core goal in life is killing Jews, to live alongside the Jews in the Jewish centers of power, that's anti-Semitic that's just like comically anti-Semitic. And to deny that these people exist, and I understand that progressives will, they're like, oh, nobody could really want the eradication of another people. And it's like, well, look to history. Look at what's happened over and over again in Israel. Like, clearly they actually do. Listen to what they're saying. Look at the actual Hamas charter. And I can understand how leftists can be like, well, they took their land or whatever, right? Like, if you don't consider that this land was ever really Jewish, which they don't. Mm-hmm. They don't consider that the Jews were, taken from their land by colonizers, which they were. But because of that, because they take that perspective, they're like, well, the Jews really should have just given up the land and left Israel. But of course, the Jews aren't going to do that, because it's not just like the Holocaust they're dealing with. It's all of the pogroms. Every time they settled somewhere, every time they weren't the majority within a country, they had mass slaughter. This happens like every 50 years for the Jewish people. Like, it's not like a one-time thing with the Holocaust. This was happening over and over and over and over again in medieval Europe. And when I look at the anti-Semitic flare-up we've had in the United States, anti-Semitic flare-up we've had in the UK, I can say without a doubt that this is not a phenomenon stuck in history. That a Jew would say, look, I'm really not safe without a land of my own. And right. We built this place into somewhere prosperous, and we took what was essentially desert and built it into a thriving technological hub. It seems a little unfair to give it back at this point.
Well, also with apparently Hamas acknowledging that they want to kind of keep some of the Jews around to
but
stuff that makes it work.
What Hamas said they wanted to do was when they raided and took Israel, they're like, well, we'll kill a lot of them, but the ones who are like economically productive, we'll keep them and essentially use them as slaves. Their plan was not to export the Jews. If that's what you think their goal was. They're like, no, Jews are economically productive.
But you're actually helping me think about the whole Gaza situation in light of this protest. Yeah, and in a new light of this, the reason why there's such a different perception of reality despite all the apparent issues. Because I mean, I think it's easy to be myopically focused just on October and just those isolated atrocities and be like, okay, small group of people got a little out of hand.
On the claim of this being a small group that got out of hand, it was a group that was organized by Hamas, a government that was elected by a higher majority than the Nazis were elected in Germany.
That's not all of the, that's not all the people of Gaza. And they were reacting to whatever, Israeli attempts at genocide. But then when you go back and you just see every attempt that countries made to maybe
To be
accommodate
nice to
them,
them and to host them and to, you see
They
that
were
this isn't
punished for that.
a beef they have with Israel. It's a beef they have with everyone. And that's why other Muslims keep them near Israel, because they hate Israel.
Well, and this being a very, well, just in general, a very unstable population that now is being used by Qatar and Iran as like a cudgel to use
Yeah,
against
but they
their
don't
enemies.
care about them. They see it as a disposable cudgel.
Right. Well, which is also, I mean, extra convenient. You don't want to use your own assets to
If you
hurt
talk with
other people.
Iranians, like in positions of power about this, they really see them as quite inhuman. They see them as completely disposable assets.
Well, which makes sense when you look at what Hamas is encouraged to do, and that they use innocent, defenseless people as human shields.
Well, you talk about that, but this is their entire mindset. A video of a mom who had her kids die in Gaza, and she is laughing and cheering and doing dances, and then she says she hopes her grandkids get to die too.
What?
Because she is so excited that they got to die in a conflict with Jews, because that is how much she hates the Jews. And this is the mindset that you're dealing with here. You think, oh, my kids died, what a horrible tragedy. The people of Gaza think it's a fiesta. Like, when you have that mindset towards anyone who's an outsider, and keep in mind, this isn't just for the Jews. Like, if they were fighting against Jordan, she'd feel the same way. If they were fighting against you can't, like, that sort of culture. You need to work really hard to dismantle it, and that's very difficult to do.
Yikes. Yeah. So, but you can't, literally, that interpretation of reality is impossible if you are a part of the urban monoculture, which again takes whatever the most morally comfortable interpretation of reality is. And the only way to morally comfortably interpret what has happened and what they are doing is to say everything is a desperate reaction to even more egregious behavior, right?
Yeah.
And then of course you're disturbed, because you're like, wow, if this is their desperate, if whatever they're reacting to is way, way, way worse than this, then the things that are happening to them are truly unforgivable.
Yeah, they must be truly, yeah.
And we just have to end it. And if we just end that, they won't do anything bad anymore.
It's like when they're like they were put in a human zoo and stuff like that. Like, and it's like, well, look at the walls on the Israeli side and look at the walls on the Egyptian side. Who is really, like, this isn't a cage that was created by one people. This was a cage that was created by all of their neighbors who independently learned it was necessary. Like, but they can't see that. They can't see that one culture might be more violent.
I couldn't understand it before. And now I feel like you're helping me understand it, which is that this has to be a reaction, a defensive reaction to even more egregious behavior. And if I thought that was true, then I could see myself fighting for the same cause that the pro-Gaza people are fighting for. Because that would be terrifying if it were true. It's not true.
No, hold on. I note here, when we're talking about egregious behavior, we're talking about egregious behavior before the attacks. After the attacks, there has been a lot of civilian casualties.
Oh, yeah.
I will note that. I just don't see what other choice Israel has. Like, their sons and daughters are still in caves being traded as,
well, but again, like what you see Israel
slaves
doing is what I think the Gaza supporters think Gaza is doing, right? Israel is responding in a very violent and terrifying way to something even more violent and terrifying that happened to them.
But Israel would stop if they just released the prisoners. Like, that's it. Like, it's so, one of the things there is all you need to do is for the prisoners to be released, and this ends. And this idea that you would be and Israel will not stop until the prisoners are released. I'm
Gaza's not going to release the prisoners. They're not going to do
that. Which means that Israel will keep going. And so if you're like a person who thinks that you can get Israel to abandon its sons and daughters to the grape slaves for the rest of their lives, likely, if they don't get them back, Israel's not going to do that. Israel, it just won't. Like there's no way that a country could accept that degree of indignity, or a people could accept that degree of indignity. And with that being the case, this war is going to continue until that ends. I say this not because it's logical or fair or anything like that. There's a huge difference between losing your kid as a collateral casualty in a war or something like that, knowing one of my kids died that way, and knowing one of my kids was actively tied up in a cave, being used as a grape slave, and that was likely the fate that they were going to suffer for the rest of their lives if we didn't go through with this. And I'm not saying it's fair. I'm not saying it's fair that if you say, oh, Malcolm, you've already killed 50,000 people to save your one kid. Like, are you going to stop now? Like, I'd be like, no, it wouldn't even cross my mind. And I think, while there's a few cultural groups, like maybe urban monocultural people wouldn't feel that way, I think the vast majority of parents on Earth would feel that way. And they'd feel that way about their kin as well, like my cousins, my extended family network as well. If I knew that one of their kids was tied up in a cave being used that way, and would be for the rest of their lives if I didn't make a point to save them, everything would be on the table for me. And that's what I mean when I say, if you actually care about stopping this, regardless of what you think of Israel, the only way to do it is to free the hostages. And so I think if you're talking about like international pressure, if what you actually care about is the people of Gaza and not getting rid of the Jews, as is what is often the case if among like the base population in these Arab countries, which is why they care less about the destruction in Gaza and more about, yeah, but let's just keep this going, right? Like Iran wants, right? The way that you end this is by putting pressure on Gaza to release the refugees, not the hostages.
Yeah, but Gaza's not going to do that. Gaza wants this conflict.
Gaza, yeah. Well, and Israel does, and Hamas loses its reason to be in power if it doesn't keep the conflict going.
I mean, I also get the impression that they're being funded again by these countries that are using them as a cudgel, that don't care about their safety or their ability to thrive.
Well, they don't see them as fully human. I mean, I can. One of the things that people really misunderstand about Muslims is Muslims often see other Muslims with huge variations in degrees of humanity.
Well, do you think it's kind of, I mean, you're describing a worse situation than what we encountered in Latin America in terms of just like, we don't like this idea of Latinx or Latino. Or
no. It's way bigger. So if you talk about like, we've talked about how Latin Americans will,
they don't see themselves as Latin Americans. They see themselves as Peruvian or Ecuadorian.
Yeah,
or
they'll
Colombian
have beefs between different countries. They'll be like, how dare you think I'm like Colombian or something? Like the Colombians are like whatever stereotype or whatever. That is not what you get. I've heard words like cockroaches used to describe other countries' populations and stuff like that. I would never hear that from a Latin America. Now, Latin America,
no.
They not like
oh, you sound like a Cuban. Yeah,
but it wouldn't say they're
dehumanizing. Yeah, it's not dehumanizing. It's more like team sports.
Right. Within Muslim countries, that is not the case. Even if they may believe they have a shared cause, many of them believe that they are quite superior to the others.
Well, what's so screwed up is that the countries that are most monetarily and logistically supportive of Hamas and Gazans are those that are literally hurting them the most. They're just using them as weapons.
They don't care.
That's so screwed up.
Well, the Gazans don't care that they don't care. If you look at this woman who's dancing because her kids died, like this is the way they're like, oh, well, we're using them as well because they don't understand. This is our easy pass to heaven.
I don't like this.
They see, and this is literally the way they see it. They see incite conflict, get killed, get into heaven automatically. That's why they want the conflict.
So their lives are not great.
And then what you're getting is like a twisted version of this that's coming through like Western media that's meant to like play to Western sympathies.
Well, then, I mean, is the leftist hope that like, I mean, I think the leftist hope is we save the Gazans and then we basically colonize them with our leftist culture. Because I mean, obviously, the long game wouldn't be them just letting them be as they are. Then they wouldn't.
No, because they don't believe they believe that because they're like a brown culture, a BIPOC culture, they don't need like they're gonna say like,
oh that's not the long. Come on, the
I know that's not the long game. The long game is to erase all of their cultural
100%.
But they don't actually plan to do that in the near future. They have no plan.
Yeah, it'd be great if that was the near future. This is one of those places in which I'm like, okay, let the urban monoculture erase this.
If you want to see another instance where we ended up feeling this way, it was when Pakistan's primary religious authority voted that it was Islamophobic to ban child marriages. And this is a country where kids are regularly married at the ages of 6 or 9.
Like this is, if you're okay with your kids, all right. Okay. What do you want for dinner?
Well, you've got some miso soup in the fridge.
I have miso. I can do miso and gyoza if you want.
Yeah, miso. I'm open to like solid foods again. So a little bit of gyoza, not many, like
4.
4 max. Yeah.
Okay, 4 gyoza.
And I'll probably eat like 2.
And miso.
And miso, but not as much. Maybe just no
tofu. Oh, like 4 little chunks.
Like 4 little chunks. Yeah.
I was trying to give you more protein yesterday. I know you're like, I don't need that much. You do need protein. Though now, oh God forbid, our audience hear that you consume soy products. Oh no. Anyway, I will start your Indian and
oh my God.
Hang in there. I love
Hey,
you.
well, actually, why don't you just do one of the beef gyozas and then 2 of the vegetable gyozas?
Well, now we're up to 5, huh? Okay.
No, just 1 beef, 2 vegetables. That's 3.
Oh, just 3. Oh, I thought you said 3. Okay. All right.
1 beef, 2 vegetables.
That few. Okay. Okay. Do you want me to bring them up to your room so you can nap?
No. I'll come down and eat with you guys tonight.
You sure? Because I mean, you're still looking a little green around the gills.
Am I?
Yeah.
I'll get through it.
Okay. Well,
I love
we'll be
you.
glad to see you. I love you too. Are you still feeling the fatigue, or is it mostly gone?
It's just that all of a sudden I'll get super tired. So I basically have periods where I'm feeling fine. And then after about 2.5 hours of working or doing something, I have to crash out. So that's where I am in recovery right now. By the way, I love this article. What newspaper was this in?
The Atlantic? Which one?
Yeah, The Atlantic that they talked about. I love your quote here. If I spend an afternoon with the kids, the house is cleaner than it was before. The kids are all well behaved. They're fed. They're all dressed. They look neat and tidy. She told me, if Malcolm spends an afternoon with the kids, I come home, they're naked, their faces are smattered with candy smudges. Many women, she said, don't accept this anarchic brand of dad parenting, so they cut back and do the work themselves. If we revised that and made it more normalized to have kids that are more chaotically parented in a more chill way, she said, I think women would be more comfortable not leaning out.
I think it's true.
Yeah, well, no, it is true, but I love your description of me as a parent. Just
to be fair, our children just really love taking off their clothes.
Yeah, and I don't put them back on. I'm just
You
like,
don't bother,
they're not gonna
yeah.
get sick or something. I keep their underwear on
Yeah,
generally.
you don't bother to like constantly wipe their faces. And I don't know what is up with Titan, but she just can't seem to eat food without like distributing
You
it.
don't give them candy either. They're with dad, and it's candy time all the time.
Yeah, it is. Ooh, RFK would just shoot you on sight, drive a stake through your heart. Thank goodness you
I
aren't
am a
in
child
the-
who grew up in the 90s. I understand the value of fruit roll-ups and Dunkaroos. You, my friend, do not.
We literally walk down grocery store aisles, and you're like, our children need these things. You're like the equivalent of an almond mom or a crunchy mom, but like with the opposite things. Like they're not getting enough processed food.
I know.
Where's the red dye number 40?
I am, the old Nickelodeon zones and everything like that. That is my understanding of nutrition. It's like they need to have more slime. They need to have more
Go-Gurt.
Yes, Go-Gurt.
Does Go-Gurt even exist anymore? I don't think so.
No, I wouldn't give them Go-Gurt. That's too close to yogurt.
Oh God, too
I would
healthy.
give them Lunchables or something. Simone, we're talking about like Gushers here. Come on, we're talking about like the good stuff. Come on.
I don't know. I feel like because Feastables became a thing, that Lunchables must have been more beloved than Gushers. To be clear.
Gushers are still around, sweetheart.
Oh,
Gushers
they never went out of style, right?
They never went out of style.
Well,
because
there you go.
Gushers are delicious. Yes. What?
I'm just like Toasty. I refuse to eat candy.
One of our kids refuses to eat candy. I want real food.
Yeah. But he
You gotta
wants
get
to
a video.
unwrap it. He wants to unwrap the candy and then just throw it away.
Oh yeah, he wants to unwrap it and then give it to his siblings.
Yeah.
Remember, you got to get a video of him doing the I want real food, so that when he becomes and starts his food company, he can call it real food. And do a
Real
little
food.
video
Yeah,
music.
that's gonna be his business.